Francisco d'Ancona.
Watching, we know you.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Face to Face with me, Azad Ali. In the studio today we have Yusuf Patel, who heads up an organization called SREIslamic, okay? And we will kind of get into the discussion about what the organization is about. Today, what we want to look at is sex, relationship and education and the impact it has on children and generally in terms of education. Now, this is a topic, Brother Yusuf, that is on everyone's lip in the community, to be honest. But there are a lot of confusion, there are a lot of misunderstandings. And perhaps one of the things we'd like to do today is really understand, okay, what is SRE? So maybe I can start off with that question.
So SRE is a subject that has been taught in primary schools and secondary schools for many years. And at the moment, it's a non-statutory subject, which means that schools can decide to teach it or not. And most importantly, parents have the right to withdraw their children from these classes. And so if parents don't like their children attending these classes, they can just make a withdrawal request to the school and their children are removed from those classes. But things are changing.
Okay, so I mean, in terms of sex, relationship and education, I mean, what are the concerns? Why would someone want to remove their child from that class?
I think when I speak to parents, one of the main objections they have to what's taught in SRE is graphic imagery. So things that are inappropriate for young children to view. So some of the videos, for example,
You say inappropriate,
yes,
but non-Muslim students, they don't see it that way, or parents, they don't see it that way.
Actually, some of the resources, actually, most parents, when they see it, like for example, there was a Channel 4 video that was being shown in the majority of primary schools. It's called Living and Growing, and that had within it a segment which contained a depiction of a man and a woman, a cartoon man and a woman engaging in sexual relations.
Right. Okay.
And when parents found out that this was being taught, this is Muslim and non-Muslim parents, they were aghast.
Okay.
They were
so it's wider.
Yes.
No, it's not just a Muslim community.
And in the end, because of the public pressure, Channel 4 had to edit the video and take some sections out of it. Okay. So it's not just that Muslim parents are against it, but that some of the resources are unacceptable to most parents, but also from the perspective of Muslim parents, that the basis by which they discuss these subjects is from our perspective not correct. And so they start off with the discussion to say that what we need to do is educate children to make sexual relations safer. Yeah. So teaching about condoms, teaching about safer sex. There's within schools they talk about children really being prepared to understand sexual matters when they're 9 or 10 years old or 11 years old, when that shouldn't even be a thing that they think about until much later. So
yeah, I mean, okay, true, you say that, but if we look at it from the other perspective, which is, I mean, we're living in a time, in a society and an environment where actually sexualization is everywhere. And you know, with the internet and everything else, pornography, access, all of that kind of stuff. But also, if we look at it from a medical point of view and a health point of view, there are a lot of sexually transmitted diseases, there are a lot of pregnancies and unwanted pregnancies. There's a lot of abortions that are taking place. So there is a kind of, you know, there is something there that the government needs to look at, or society as a whole needs to look at to deal with. So isn't it right that, you know, children are educated? I mean, maybe the example I would use is like saying no to drugs. You know, you have like education about drugs in primary schools. You know, sometimes a police officer comes in and says, this is what you should avoid, and shows graphic pictures of what, say, being hooked on cocaine or, you know, things like that can do.
Well, that's a good example, because if in schools children were being taught that drugs are not wholly bad, and that a little bit of drugs are not that bad, some drugs are better than others, parents would be up in arms, and society would be saying, how can you teach your children, or how can children be taught mixed messages about drugs? In fact, in secondary schools, teachers were advised to teach children that not all that sexual relations under the age of consent, under the age of 16, is not necessarily bad if it's consensual between two children who are of the same age.
But isn't that illegal?
That is illegal. But for when
you have teachers saying this.
Yes,
that's a bit.
In the sense
I'm
that
actually
they
shocked
say,
myself.
in the sense that they say from the guidance, they say that children are going to engage in early sexual relations. So instead of trying to stop them from engaging in those, make it safer and make them aware about things like consent. Now, some of those issues are not problematic, but when you talk about drugs, there's a very clear perspective that children are taught. But when it comes to sexual relations, they're not taught in that same graphic way, rather they're giving mixed signals. But actually, at the moment, in the beginning, when these issues were being discussed, we were told that it would reduce teenage pregnancies. There's actually no evidence that it does reduce teenage pregnancies. And actually now, the push for more SRE isn't about reducing teenage pregnancies. It's more about discussing consent, bringing equality, respect amongst boys towards girls, and so those things are being used to push the same objective through the back door. And I think that's the problem, because if we're having a conversation about these issues, we should be upfront about why we think this is good for our young people.
Well, that's actually the point, isn't it? I mean, if the reason you would have education about drugs is because drugs are a problem, and it's becoming a problem in a society, and it needs to be dealt with. If you're having SRE lessons, then it needs to be because of something. Now, in all of these discussions, I mean, one thing as parent, myself, and other parents maybe that are watching, is they're going to say, okay, well, how does these conversations come about? Who decides? I mean, and where are the moral implications on this? Because, you just talked about age of consent and everything else. Maybe the age things are a construct, but nonetheless, there is a moral issue. For example, from a Muslim perspective, having sexual relations outside of marriage is a sin, and things like that. So how does that element come into all of this?
Well, in terms of when the discussions about what should be taught at school are discussed and are agreed, either by the government when it becomes statutory later on, or different organisations that are pushing for more and more SRE in schools. Morality doesn't really come into it. Morality doesn't enter that equation. Rather, it's about, children aren't taught this is good and this is bad, because the reality is morality in society.
Aren't they? Sorry to interrupt you, but aren't they? Because here we're saying they're being taught about consent, they're being taught about respect, all of that. So there are moral guidance.
But those moral ideas, those ideas are being shaped by what people believe children should know. They're not necessarily not saying to children this is they're actually saying this is the law, and you could break the law by overstepping the marks on the boundaries on consent. So rape and things like that are absolutely out of the question. If you engage in sexual harassment, that's also considered to be against the law. But the point is that the schools are a reflection of the changing tide of morality in society. Obviously, this society, maybe even 60 years ago, was based upon certain morals that were still there from Christianity, from those types of values. Today, those values are completely gone, and rather it's a free for all. So I think the schools are a reflection of society at large.
Okay, so I mean, we're going to come up to a break shortly, but just before we do, I mean, we talked quite a lot about the sex side of this subject. What about the relationship side of it? I mean, what kind of relationship? Because the other thing people kind of have concerns about is what type of relationships are being promoted or taught to children.
Well, the reality is, from the perspective of law, the schools have to teach about the nature of marriage. That's a legal requirement for all schools. But as we know, marriage, as we understood it maybe 20 years ago, was between a man and a woman, who decide to live their lives together. They have vows, they have commitment to each other. Now that's changed because gay marriage has become legalized. So schools have to, by law, talk about the different relationships that exist. So they talk about a marital relationship between a man and a woman, a man and a man, a woman and a woman. Sometimes some people don't marry. That's also a cohabiting relationship. Some people choose to live alone. So they have to teach the broad area
What about the
of different
religious
relationships.
aspect of this? Do they not bring any of that out? You know,
That
from,
could be a dimension.
like Jewish tradition or Christian.
That could be a
or Muslim?
dimension, but the thing is, all of
Is
these
the-
relationships are
I mean, in the
considered equal.
guidance, is it not?
No.
that
Because
it's
all of these relationships are considered equal.
Right.
Yeah? None are better than the others. So you can't say marriage between a man and a woman is better than marriage between a man and a man or a woman and a woman. Because in law, all of these are considered equal relationships.
Yeah.
And all legal
Legally
relationships.
they are, yes. But,
so schools have to reflect that.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
but I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, okay, so you're teaching about marriage and you're talking about different types of relationship.
yeah.
But what about the things from a religious aspect? Because there are people who are religious in the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
And their views
Yes.
and the views they would
Yes.
like also
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
shared.
Well, the reality is, even from the point of view of SRE, the guidance that exists at the moment, which is being changed, but it still exists until 2020, that guidance states that schools have to adapt SRE teaching to take into account the culture of the community the school serves and the religious background of the
Locally?
children.
So
Yeah,
it's a decision of the local education authority?
No,
or
it's a
something?
school should reflect. School should say that, okay, in my school, I've got 40% Christian children, I've got 50% Muslim children, and maybe 10% who don't ascribe to any belief system. So I should tailor what I teach in SRE based on the background of the pupils in my school. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen.
All right. So
yeah.
let me
Yes.
actually just stop you there. We're going to go for a short break, but I think, you know, it's getting interesting and we're going to carry on. Do join us after the break. See you soon. Assalamu alaikum. So just before the break, I mean, we were just talking about taking into consideration the local dynamics of, you know, the pupils that you have in your school and everything else. Just like moving that discussion on a little bit more. I mean, we started at the beginning of the show saying that it's changed. SRE has changed from what it used to be. So for our viewers, can you just tell us specifically what are those changes that are of importance?
So the changes were first of all, changes have happened in terms of they become law, but they haven't been implemented. So last year in the Health and Social Care Act, the new subjects were introduced and were given a designated a statutory footing. And so in primary schools from September 2020, schools will have to teach that a new subject called relationship education. Now, the government says this is not a replacement for sex and relationship education. Rather, schools can still teach SRE and children can still be withdrawn. But the reality is, most schools will decide to teach elements of SRE within RE. Yeah,
Right.
because the remit of that subject is quite broad.
So
now, with
RE
that subject,
now means relationship.
it means religious education and relationship education,
okay.
which is confusing anyway.
Right.
But also, parents will not have the right to withdraw their children from these classes.
Okay.
So in primary schools, there's no right to withdraw anymore. In secondary schools, there will be a new subject called relationship and sex education, which is a replacement for SRE in secondary schools.
Right.
Now, it says the government says parents will have the right to withdraw, but that withdrawal has to be okayed by the head teacher. And the head teacher says the head teacher should usually say that all withdrawal requests should be accepted, but in exceptional circumstances, the head teacher can reject a request.
Okay.
We don't know the basis for when they can reject a request, whether there's an appeals process, whether there's any way to challenge that rejection.
Okay.
But the problem is that the withdrawal has been diluted, and that goes against what the government promised us 2 years, even a year ago.
Right. So, I mean, these changes that have taken place, so, I mean, in essence, what it sounds like is you had an option to withdraw your child from these classes before. That option is basically going now.
Well, in primary schools it's gone,
Yeah.
and in secondary schools it's been diluted. And so we don't know whether parents will be allowed by a head teacher who prefers that all children are taught SRE. Because a head teacher could say, I believe RSE, relationship and sex education, is an entitlement for all children. And on that basis, I'm not going to accept withdrawal because adult children will be left out and stigmatized. So I'm not going to accept withdrawals.
Yeah.
And now, what can a parent do now?
Yeah.
Who can they turn to? Ofsted? I doubt Ofsted will do very much. Department of Education, I don't know whether they'll do very much. The local authority, the governing body, I'm not sure what they can do. So I think it's very, at the moment, these things are not fully defined, because the draft guidance that was released recently for consultation was was not very clear. And so when we responded to the consultation, we asked the government to be much clearer and to tighten up on some of the areas that are very unclear, very mixed, very confused.
Okay. So I mean, so this has now become statutory almost, and so it's part of the national curriculum.
Yeah, from September 2020.
From September 2020. So so it's going 2 years ahead.
Right. Yeah.
What schools? So does that mean, like, every school that implements the national curriculum has to, whether it's Islamic or not, has to have this bit?
Well, this will apply. The making RSC a new subject and RE a new subject is going to be statutory in all schools, which means state schools, community schools, academies, even independent schools.
Right.
So Muslim schools, faith schools, voluntary aided schools will all be affected by that. Now the government says that schools of a faith character can decide to teach it in a way which is in conformity with their background, with their religious background.
Right.
But the reality is, for how long will the public accept that faith schools have almost an opt-out from what other children are being taught? And so when we see that as a starting point for a future push for an equalization of what's being taught in all schools, so that's a concern.
I mean, the way you've just said it is, it seems like, but I'm just trying to understand. If I'm running a Muslim school or a Jewish school or a Christian school, and within and I have to teach this because it's part of the national curriculum now.
Yeah.
The guidance says to me is that I can tailor it to be in line with my religious belief. So if for example, in my religion, marriage, sex outside of marriage is a sin, and something else, I can kind of teach that in the class.
Yes.
Now, from what I understand, if I can do that in my school, wouldn't that then create a different learning for one set of children than another set of children? So, for example, not all Jewish people or Christian people go to Jewish school or Christian schools, and not all Muslims will go to Muslim schools. So, isn't that going to be a problematic thing? I mean, children are going to learn different things.
It is problematic if state schools don't adapt the way they teach the subject to take into account the religious character of their pupils. So in some boroughs in London especially, and in some parts of the north, and in Birmingham, in the Midlands, you have some schools which are 80–90% composed of Muslim children.
Right.
Now, in those schools, if a school decides to teach it in a manner not in conformity with the religious background of those pupils, then that's a problem. Yeah, that is a real problem, because then you're saying that I'm going to decide on what the children should be taught. But that's against the values that children should be taught because they've come from a particular faith background.
Okay, so just bringing to look at the impact on children. If I ask you just straight ahead, if this subject wasn't taught, what would the impact be on children?
If this subject was not taught?
At all.
Yeah, at all. Well, I think children, firstly, society needs to take responsibility for the fact that they have created an environment that is hostile to children. Hostile to children. So this goes beyond just.
What do you mean hostile? In
because
that sense?
Children. Anybody who understands child development knows that children should be allowed to live their childhood. Should be allowed to innocently live a childhood that doesn't involve things which make them scared, insecure, or prepare them for or force them to grow up before they are able to grow up. And unfortunately, we as a society are forcing children to grow up before they are ready. We're destroying their innocence and expecting them to understand really adult topics, which sometimes adults don't understand.
But is that really the case? I mean, we're talking about here being in a Western country, but I'm sure if you go into countries in the East or Muslim, predominantly Muslim, everything else, children there are also growing up faster than
Absolutely.
what we understand.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm talking about, you know, children working,
Yeah.
children
Yes,
having responsibilities.
That's
So I mean, your argument maybe it's not really.
But I think are we comparing the ideal for children in this country based upon the worst practices and the worst environment for children in other countries? Actually, we should think higher than that. We should set the bar higher. Yeah, and I think the problem is that throughout the world, you know, because of things like the fact that pornography has become so readily available, even in Muslim world, and this is across the world. This is not just saying this is about the West alone, but just because of these types of imagery that has become very common throughout the whole world, we're actually shaping the way people think about subjects in a way that is destroying what we understand as human sexuality should be about.
I mean, you're talking about pornography. I think, I mean, yes, it's very damaging, and it has an impact. I'm not denying that. But generally speaking, whether it's in this country or in a Muslim country, from my personal observation anyway, I can see that there is far more relaxation of, say, relationships, even if, you know, it was unheard of when I was growing up for a boy and a girl to be seen by anyone. But now, boyfriend, girlfriends, they're actually visiting each other's homes, and the parents are welcoming them. So is it that, you know, maybe what you're trying to say is really out of touch of where society is? Or is it that, you know, you're looking at it from an idealistic, religious perspective that, you know, is lost?
Obviously, I'm definitely, as a Muslim, I'm looking at it from a perspective that, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messengers require or request or expect us to behave in a particular manner, with regards to the opposite gender, and that's, you know, that is considered by most people old-fashioned. That's considered like Victorian values for most people. They don't accept this idea that the first person you engage with sexual relationships with is going to be your wife, and that you've never had sexual relations before, and that's considered like a strange idea. And I remember when I got married, and I said to my work colleagues, "Yeah, I'm getting married." They said, "Oh, how did you meet your wife?" And they were really. They were shocked. That I could see they were visibly shocked that oh, you're meeting your wife for you're meeting her and then you're marrying her without having lived with her. That's so. Actually, the reality is we do if we practice Islamic moral conduct, we are going to be abnormal in the society. That's clear. But I think if we have those principles because we believe that this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has defined for us, the way we live our lives, then that's fine to be seen as abnormal. We can discuss with other people about morality and about why we live in a particular way that we do in a non-defensive way. But the reality is, you asked the question about what would schools look like, if we didn't have SRE. And I think schools would be a place where children learn and flourish and do this and are involved with things.
I'm going to have to actually stop you there. It's actually a good point to stop on, and I'm sorry we've run out of time. But we are going to carry on this discussion, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair for coming in. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, viewers. Join me again next week.
Eman Channel. We know you.